The Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome back for another week of live shows right here on The Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker. I'm joined tonight by my usual co-host and my good friend, Mr. Johnny Whistles. We've got a really special show lined up for you tonight. We're going to be going behind the cameras, behind the scenes, and behind the silver screen itself, and taking a look at the darker side of Hollywood. You know, growing up, I used to look at films and think, yeah, pure entertainment, loved it. Then as you start to get older, you start to notice that the directors are trying to tell you lots more inside their movies. And then you wake up. You become aware of the symbols that they use, the agendas at play, and you never, ever watch a film in the same light again. And that's why tonight I can't wait to get into all of this through his new book. And we're talking about Mr. J. Dyer. Now, we'll get to him in just a moment. But Johnny, this topic tonight, esoteric Hollywood, this is the kind of thing that it doesn't matter what kind of topics people like to research. Everyone can relate to what we're going to be getting into tonight.
Yeah, exactly, Kev. We've all seen the movies, and a lot of the times that we probably haven't seen the esoteric messages that are in these films, Kevin. As you say, not until you wake up and not until you actually research these things and you look and see, it is incredible. And as you say, Kev, you can't watch a film the same, and I'm exactly the same as you, because I almost look for them now, Kevin. It actually wastes the film that I'm watching.
Absolutely. And, you know, without wasting any time, folks, let's just get into this, because we are going to be joined momentarily by Jay Dyer, and he's the man and the brains behind Jay's Analysis. Now, this has grown to become one of the premier film and philosophy sites on the net, showcasing the talents of Jay Dyer, whose graduate work focused on the interplay of film, geopolitics, espionage, and psychological warfare. Now, Jay is a public speaker, a lecturer, a comedian, and also the author of the popular title Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, as well as the host of the Jay's Analysis podcast, Esoteric Hollywood. Now, Jay is also a regular contributor to a fake news website like ourselves, 21st Century Wire, Soul of the East, and the Espionage History Archive, broaching subjects as wide as satire, metaphysics, film analysis, theology, geopolitics, literature, and history, as well as interviewing numerous prominent figures. Jay has authored hundreds of articles already read by millions in the past few years. Now, Jay's been on the show before, and I can't wait to have him back on. So let's get into this. Jay, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, Kev. It's a pleasure to be here. I finally finished the book. I think last time we talked in January, I was on your show, and I was writing the book at the time, and now it's complete, and it's out there in the world, and it's doing great. I've had a tremendous reception. It's been shipping out in the last week and a half. So absolutely, esoteric Hollywood is what I put the last couple of years into.
Now, just before we get into some of the topics you actually cover in the book, Jay, for any of the new listeners out there, I mean, what really inspired you to go down this road to examine the Hollywood industry?
Mainly just because if you are from America, you have grown up in movies. Like, since youth, you've been watching movies. And, it's just part of Western culture, de facto. And so I as I got older, I got more interested in philosophy and religious topics. And then when I went to college, I continued that interest in film, and so I took some film classes, and I had a particularly interesting class that was Hollywood history. And what we did was we looked at a lot of Oliver Stone films and how they kind of compared to the official story of events. And so it was kind of a historical / fictional analysis with films like El Salvador or JFK or Nixon. And that kind of gave me the idea around 2005 or 6 to just maybe start writing film analyses that went a little bit deeper than your typical Roger Ebert style analysis. So what I do is kind of like Roger Ebert on acid. So I kind of go crazy with it and, get as deep as I can. So it's a lot more than just saying, oh, here's a movie and, it's good for this reason or it's not good for this reason. It's actually telling you what the symbols mean, what the director might mean, reading between the lines and giving you the deeper background story, because a lot of films, a lot more than we would expect, as you mentioned in your introduction there, we grow up and then we come back to it with new eyes. And that's really what my book tries to do, is to give you those lenses to see the films with new eyes.
Absolutely. And, you don't do yourself any justice, Jay, because having read, halfway through the book, the amount of footnotes and all the places that you cite, it's so well researched, and you really do have a unique way at looking at things. And, you describe film itself, as opposed to being entertainment, it's like a modern day ritual. And I find that really fascinating, because we often cover the cults on here, the secret mystery schools, the rituals they go through. But to actually carry that forward and to say, this is what we're participating via Hollywood, quite amazing. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, the introduction and the first chapter deal with the concept of film and movies as ritual. And so, for example, if we think about the way that, just take Christianity as example, the way that they've tended historically to believe that the Mass or the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper ceremony is a kind of remembrance or representation of the events of Christ, at Calvary or something like that. Hollywood kind of functions the same way as the new myth maker, the new stories of the gods from Olympus, and they give us the worldview, the lenses by which we're supposed to interpret our reality. And so, in that regard, I see it as a kind of ritual, because if you go back to the original Greek theater with Sophocles or any of these characters, any of the Antigone or any of these ancient Greek plays, what you'll see is that the stories of the gods, or with Homer's Odysseus and things like this, these are stories, but they're religious in nature, so they're still theological. And Hollywood is no different, despite the probably most prevalent view that Hollywood's just a bunch of liberals and this and that. Well, no, actually, it's a lot more esoterica. It's a lot of Freemasonry. It's a lot of darker Crowleyan stuff. It's a lot of Kabbalah. It's all these things kind of mixed together in a new form of myth making. It's the new mythos. So that's why I characterize it as ritual, and why movie theaters are really kind of our new chapels, right? Or celluloid chapels, I call them.
Absolutely. And once you do realize that there's so much more going on in these movies, like you described it brilliantly, when you've got the eyes to see, it might be fiction that we're watching. However, it is more reality-based than some of us are ever willing to accept. And Stanley Kubrick, he features very highly in your book, and I loved that segment, Jay, I really did. His films, I've always liked his films, but you gave me a unique way of looking at The Shining as well. But right now, Eyes Wide Shut, it's very topical, especially when we throw into the mix what's going on with Pizzagate right now. And it's hard for some people to come to terms with what these elites and these politicians get up to. Yet here was Kubrick showing us in Eyes Wide Shut those years ago. Absolutely,
yeah. So I think Eyes Wide Shut's in 1999, which is interesting because 999 is 666. But you can look at Eyes Wide Shut as it's probably the clearest example of what I was talking about a few minutes ago. All right, so film as ritual. Well, that's why I included the first analysis as Eyes Wide Shut. And the first 90 or so pages are Kubrick films, because most of them kind of have that same theme of film as ritual. So this is really, I see it as Tom Cruise's character, Bill Harford. It's kind of the fool. And he's kind of the archetype fool character who is being led down this garden path towards what he thinks is just kind of his lustful curiosity about, what it would be like to have sex outside of his marriage, and at the same time he sees himself as kind of the top of the totem pole in terms of social order, as a kind of nouveau riche, upper class New York doctor. But what he comes to find out is that actually he's not running things. There's a class of persons, far above him, particularly something like the billionaire class, right? And they have way more power and every means at their disposal by which to kind of construct reality. And so when we think about intelligence operations or psychological operations, and the cult in Eyes Wide Shut, which does seem to echo, the things that we're seeing out in the news now with Marina Abramovich and Spirit Cooking and all this stuff of Pizzagate and so forth. This cult in the film is able to utilize all of the means that an intelligence agency uses. Right? They have all those means at their disposal. They're able to tail Bill Harford across town. They can control the news stories in relationship to the beauty queen's death. They can do pretty much anything that they want because they, have all the means at their disposal. So what I see the film on one level as is an instruction or a kind of middle finger to the audience. Now Kubrick may have been legitimately trying to wake people up. I don't know. But I'll ask you. But the
reason.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, did you think that was he warning us? Was he trying to tell us what's happening? Or was it just more revelation of the method that we see?
I tend to think it's revelation of the method, but I also don't want to be too critical and judge him unfairly just because I don't know enough about what his motivations were. And like I say, it's not really a Kubrick analysis. It's more of a Kubrick film analysis. So I'm looking at the films and what is the film saying, and I see the title of the film is really containing the entire message, right? You out there in the audience, your eyes are wide shut to the way that the world really runs, and even when you see it in the film, you're still not going to believe it. I mean, and we see this now, right, with all this stuff coming out from WikiLeaks, and what are most people doing? They just can't believe it. I mean, plenty of people do believe it, that are making YouTube videos and whatnot. But the entire establishment and all the so-called progressives, there's just no way that's true. There's no such thing as any of this.
I know, it's quite shocking when you realize it is true. And even in that film, there's a segment where he goes to the costume shop, and we even get hinted at the fact that the pedophilia, it's there in that movie as well. And that's something that Kubrick pointed to a couple of times. He was trying to get out there, or at least he was letting us know that this is the sport of these elites.
Yes, Lolita has that theme. The theme of Clockwork Orange is sex, rape, and mind control, MK Ultra. The theme of Barry Lyndon is class struggle, and of course the character Barry Lyndon trying to climb his way up to the top of the elite royal structure. And if I recall, there is pedophilic elements of Barry Lyndon as well. It's been a long time since I've watched it. I might not be correct about that. But The Shining, of course, is also a story of pedophilia because Danny, the Jack Nicholson character's son, has been molested by Jack Nicholson. And if you haven't ever paid enough attention to the film, that is there. You will see that if you go back and watch it. And I kind of detailed that in the chapter on The Shining. So, yeah, this has come up many times in Kubrick, yes.
And The Shining as well. I mean, maybe it's because I've got confirmation bias, but I've watched Jay Weidner's work on the fact that it might be hinting that Kubrick himself had something to do with the moon landings, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm interested to see your take on The Shining and the demonic possession kind of aspect of it, because that's something we deal with on the show as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think... I'm not dissing Jay Weidner's approach. In fact, Jay and I are going to be doing a 13-part TV series based on my book. So I think his view is complementary to mine, but I take the approach that I think that it's really just telling a ghost story, but not a ghost story in a flippant sense, a ghost story about haunted America in the sense of, the elite are actually that degenerate, especially in this country. And what they do is they do human traffic, and that is what we've seen. And, that is hinted at even in The Shining with the proprietor of the hotel, Stuart Ullman. He explains to Jack that in the heyday, The hotel was the source of the jet set, the British elite, the royals, the Hollywood people having orgies. And that's why you see the character of the furry who's giving the fellatio to the one of the looks to be British elite in that infamous scene where Jack's wife Shelley Duvall looks in the room and she sees that guy. She sees the ghost basically of these elites from the heyday of the hotel. So that's all there subtly in that film as well.
Now, we've touched on Kubrick. You also touch on a few other directors as well, Jay. Could you throw out a couple of the things for the listeners that they can find in this book if they decide to get it?
Yeah, we talk about, after the Kubrick section, I go into, for American film at least, who I see as the most important, and just in terms of money and influence and big films, and that would be Spielberg. So I spend about the next 90 or so pages dealing with Spielberg movies, precisely because he's been so influential in terms of Aliens. And, Spielberg's very committed to this idea, and it's a big part of his worldview. And what I see, I'm a critic of Darwinism, so what I see the film industry doing is actually propping up Darwinism as a form of science fiction. So that's how I view it, in fact. And I kind of tie it into the similarities that you see with alien cults. And we could think about things like Scientology or the Raelians or any of these very bizarre sort of cults. The operandi of these cults is very similar to the way that Darwinism works, in my view. And I'm sure that's a controversial opinion, but nevertheless, that's my view. And one of the main ways, a lot of people probably aren't aware of this, they probably think, Darwinism is part of academia and universities, and you go and you study biology and you come out, having learned, quote, science and life science, and that's where you get Darwinism. For the mass audience, Darwinism was given to them not through college universities, but through Hollywood. And I argue that, all the way back to H.G. Wells, a famous Freemason and Fabian socialist, the author of Time Machine, the author of War of the Worlds, Island of Dr. Moreau, he's always been promoting this idea, and it's not by accident. So that's a big part of the Spielberg section. I also look at things like E.T. and what the hidden message of E.T. actually was, or Minority Report, or AI. And then I go into kind of a satirical, sort of more lighthearted, goofy section based on 70s and 80s kids films like Labyrinth or Neverending Story, and how these actually have a kind of esoteric message as well. And then towards the latter section of the book, I talk about Hitchcock, I talk about 007, Ian Fleming, and how these also reveal quite a bit about the workings of the real world in terms of mafias and cartels and intelligence agencies. And then I conclude the book with a chapter called The CIA in Hollywood, A Dark Marriage. And that's really just kind of illustrating the point of the book, that, the reason for this is that what you hinted on in your introduction. You said that a lot of times people would like to tell a story, but they can't tell it, say, in mainstream media. And what spies have always done, you can go all the way back to William Somerset Maugham or Kim Philby or somebody like that. They would write fiction stories, right, based on reality. And that's what I see Hollywood as being kind of an extension of that as well.
I mean, we always hear, or we often hear, that Hollywood is some kind of big, massive Jewish conspiracy. Now, I know there's a Jewish element in there, but it goes a lot deeper than that, Jay, doesn't it? I mean, who would you say are the main players when it comes to the Hollywood movies?
Well, I think you've had historical phases where different groups kind of had vying, swaying influences. And so early on, when Edison was involved in the creation of the camera, you had the dominance of kind of a WASP elite, and then you have the rise of the Jewish film moguls, the big five studios back in the 20s and 30s. And then you have a kind of a Catholic faction as well that implements the Hays Code and things like this to kind of regulate what's considered morally normative in film. And then you also have mafia elements. You have Italian mafia, you have Jewish mafia, and other smaller mafias that are connected to not just Hollywood, but also the pornography industry, which all, of course, kind of ties in together, as well as the music industry. And then I think over time you did get the dominance of the Jewish faction in Hollywood. But what's interesting now is that seems to be a large buyout on the part of China. So there have been articles even in mainstream news the last couple of weeks of Chinese billionaires vying to buy out the major studios of Hollywood.
This is something that Alex Jones references quite a lot. And I mean, should we be worried about foreign people coming in and taking over Hollywood? What do you expect to see with the Chinese coming in there?
A tool of propaganda. I believe that Hollywood has been the greatest means and tool of propaganda the world's ever seen. And I think that the Chinese government, the Chinese government sees it as an opportunity to do whatever they want to. I mean, any government, is going to prop up the government mythology with the fiction. And this goes all the way back to Plato. And this is why Plato says, in the Republic that the arts, in his view, had to be censored because they would be a tool for oligarchs, for the moneyed elite, he says, to use the arts to basically degenerate the population so that they would be easier to control. Plato actually says that. So the governments, wherever they are always going to use this powerful medium of film and storytelling to promote their own ends.
And that's never been so obvious, for me anyway, in this current election cycle, because all these Hollywood big names, they were all queuing up to back, the losing candidates. So how do you think you're going to save face from that?
Well, that's because they are part of what Plato's talking about, right? The manipulation of the population by the, quote, stars is due to the fact that the stars are paid to do that. And who are they paid to do that by? Well, the moneyed oligarchs in the background who are interested in social engineering. And that's exactly what Plato said. Plato said you will always get, with, quote, democracy, the manipulation of the populace by moneyed oligarchs. Always. And that's what we're seeing.
We can look at people like Clooney, Angelina Jolie, both intertwined with the UN now as well.
And the CFR, yeah.
Absolutely crazy stuff. Now, we're almost coming up to the break, Jay. So where can people find your work, get the book, and also catch your podcast?
Yeah, the best way would be if you just go to jaysanalysis.com. You can find all my articles there. I think there's over 1,000 posts and articles there now, and videos, and the podcast is there as well, which is based on subscription. The first hour is free, and then I make a living actually by subscription to the second hour, which is $4.95 a month and $60 a year. And then the book can be obtained from the website or from me directly. My emails on the website are the About Me section. You can get a signed copy directly from me. That's best for the author, is to get it directly from me, or you can hit me up on Facebook or Twitter under J Dyer, or if you're outside the U.S., it's probably best just to get it through Amazon. It'd be the best way for you.
Awesome stuff. And Johnny Whistles, you've been very quiet during this first half of the show. We're listening to all this Wookiee spooky stuff that goes on in Hollywood, man. What do you make of it so far, John?
Oh, fantastic, Kevin. While we were doing that, I was also going through some of the PDF that you sent me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It's really well done.
We'll be getting into.
Thank you. Yeah, it was quite a labor. Yeah, you mentioned the research. I appreciate that. There's 404 footnotes. There's over 50 sidebars with additional information, and almost 400 pages, 360 something pages.
And I suspect with this subject matter, Jay, you might not have plans for it yet, but I suspect this will end up being volume 1 of many volumes because there is so much to cover.
Well, yeah, depending on how well this one sells. I mean, I've already at the website I've already got about 3 books worth written. So there's already two more books written at the site. So it definitely could be a series.
Awesome stuff. Now we're nearly at the break, folks, but we have got Ben Emlyn Jones. He'll be live tomorrow night, and then Nano Girl will be with us on Wednesday night. So we've got it all to look forward to this week, yet again, on the Kev Baker Show. And Jay, myself, Johnny will be back after the break. And I'm sure Johnny has got lots of questions to get into all of this Hollywood woo.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are live on the Kev Baker Show, and tonight our special guest is Mr. Jay Dyer. Now, you can find his work over at jaysanalysis.com, and we've got Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. This is Jay's new book, and we're getting into all of this tonight. Now, in the first half of the show, we touched on Kubrick and the ritual aspect of movie. Something we talk about on the Kev Baker Show a lot is rituals. And another thing we talk about is transhumanism and this whole transhumanist agenda. And I was quite blown away when I was flicking through the contents of Jay's book to find that this is something that he's addressed in there. So, Jay, this transhumanist agenda, we talk about it often, and you've referenced it in the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on
Yeah,
there?
well, if you go to, if in the 2001 chapter, it comes up precisely because 2001, in my view, kind of is a transhumanist book or story. Given that Arthur C. Clarke, is more or less committed to this worldview, and in 3001, he writes the narrative that Bowman and Hal unite to become Howlman, this super AI cyborg human entity that can traverse the galaxy as a kind of a giant transhuman chariot or something. And then by the time you get to about chapter 8, where I deal with AI, which is Spielberg's telling of what I call a transhumanist fairy tale, it's the story of Pinocchio with a transhumanist element. And so I get into how David, the character that's the AI character, he's actually portrayed as more humane and almost angelic, as compared to the human brother that he has to sort of vie against in the early part of the film. And what Spielberg's doing there is kind of weaving this narrative of a story that was actually written by Kubrick. So once again, here we have Kubrick kind of, with this predictive programming element, setting forth the new Aeon, because at the end of the film, you have these advanced alien / cyborg entities that have evolved, and they're kind of doing some archaeology on Earth, which has become this giant frozen global warming thing or global cooling thing. And they dig up David, their forefather, right, who's been frozen in the ice, and we discover that immortality is really contained in the secret of technology. That's pretty much the whole point of that film. And then I look at other films as well in that section, such as, actually in the next section when I mentioned that 70s and 80s fantasy dystopia. If you watch some of these 70s, 80s dystopias like Logan's Run, the whole city is run by a giant AI smart grid. It's based on euthanasia. You have this certain day when you're supposed to die when you hit age 30. There's an AI bot that runs the city and so forth. And then we also see the same idea in Zardoz, this sort of goofy cult film B-movie by John Borstein from 1974 with Sean Connery, where the elite have achieved immortality through technology. And this giant supercomputer that's basically a big crystal pyramid in the middle of the city of the gods, sort of Elysian field of the gods, it has the ability to regenerate and give immortality, and it's called the Temple. So the Freemasonic elements of Zardoz are immediately apparent. So that it's there in that film, and I mean you could go on and on. There's so many films that have this, but I just had to pick a select few. Blade Runner is all about that as well, because it's a war between the replicants and humans, right? Are the replicants going to live on and replace humans, right? Deckard, who is the Harrison Ford character, versus Roy Batty. And, we get this battle between the simulacrum and the reality. That's the whole point of that film. And I think transhumanism represents the possibility of attempting to overcome all limitations, including the limitations of time and space. Right? And that's actually what 2001 is about, because if you remember, Bowman evolves to the point where he can transcend time and space, and then he becomes Starchild. And he does that, in my view, through the cooperation with Hal. Hal, if you remember, it's when Bowman turns off Hal that the program initiates, where the screen comes on and it says, your actual mission, Bowman, is to follow the monolith. And then he, continues out into beyond the infinite, right, to follow the monolith, which I view as kind of an AI thing. And in the original script, Clark and Kubrick wanted the monolith to be a screen. It was going to have a almost like a TV screen with images on it. So again, that ritual element of leading you down this path, down the rabbit hole, and in their view, right, you've got this transhumanism that is going to achieve apotheosis, right, the God state of man, where man will become God.
Well, Jay, I look at some of the TV programs that are out just now, and I think it actually helps the transhumanist agenda. When you get programs such as like Arrow, and everybody seems to be a superhero. They've got some super strength, some super something. Do you know what I mean? It almost
Westworld.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of thing almost makes it. I think that a lot of people would actually queue up for something like that, because it's really, I mean, it's some of the things are way, way beyond our imagination, and I think that there is actually quite a lot of people out there that would go for that.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to buy into it. It's not in the book, but I did an analysis of the film Lucy, the Luc Besson film with Scarlett Johansson playing more or less the transhumanist goddess, where she kind of becomes the computerized goddess entity and achieves this apotheosis. And it's precisely through film that people are being inducted into the exoteric religion of transhumanism, and that's what I view it as. So Hollywood is exoteric stuff in terms of people believing the stories as they're presented. Oh, I'm going to be downloaded into a zip drive one day and I'll live on forever. But it's actually, I believe, a very dark scam or trick. So people are being led down the garden path, much like Bill Hartford in Eyes Wide Shut. Really, all of this is about mind control and keeping you in part of that matrix grid. And so anybody who jacks into or links into some sort of virtual reality matrix or something is going to be sorely displeased with the I mean, in other words, the people at DARPA, do you really want them in your brain? I don't, because they're not good people, and they're not going to give you immortality. That's the lie that's being sold. That's how I view it. Now, if any kind of medical advances or regenerative limbs or something like this that does get developed, it's going to be for the billionaire class. It's not going to be for the man on the street.
Exactly. Whether it's DARPA or even Elon Musk, who I usually speak for, and his neural lace, it's definitely not for me. But robots, cyborgs, this is the world we're moving into. And you mentioned Westworld there. Now, I know this isn't in the book, but I think they're being really clever with Westworld, because even the United Nations right now, they're talking about robot rights and what's going to be happening when this robot apocalypse is upon us. And with Westworld, we're watching that, and we're watching these robots who are no different in the appearance to you or I. They've got emotions. And I think this program itself, Jay, is initiating the conversation amongst people like us about what we are going to do when these robots arrive. But that's maybe just my way of looking at that. But Westworld, what do you make of that program?
Well, it's interesting because, this is a Michael Crichton story, and most of the Michael Crichton stories are totally predictive programming. They have a lot of these elements in them. And, I thought Michael Crichton's death was a little strange, given that he's, was in pretty good health and his heart gave out when he's in his 50s or something like this. Anyway, maybe he was in his early 60s, but Michael Crichton has written quite a bit into all of his stories, and Westworld is this idea of basically Disneyland as a giant sex theme park. Now, maybe Disneyland already is that as a kind of mind control sex theme park or something, but in terms of Westworld, what they've done is craft this Kabbalistic, Gnostic version of it, where Anthony Hopkins plays this sort of grand architect character who's created the Westworld synthetic realm as a playground for the elite to come and sort of live out their fantasies and participate in this narrative. And what we're learning is that as this season 1 is coming to a close, we're learning that the bots are kind of staging a revolution. And just like I mentioned with AI, the bots are the ones that are more humane, and it's the humans that are portrayed as the villains. And so one of the analyses I did that didn't make it into the book that's relevant to this, which I kind of wish it did, maybe it'll be in part 2, is Dune, the Frank Herbert novel in the David Lynch film from 1984 called Dune. In Dune, you have this future empire where they've had to move through a stage of what they call the Butlerian Jihad. And what the Butlerian Jihad is that when AI comes to power, it enslaves mankind. So, maybe we will actually have to have a Butlerian Jihad against the bots one day or something. I don't know. But I think that I don't believe that bots will ever be, quote, conscious or anything like that. But they could certainly be used to implement large-scale control in places like smart cities. And I think that is precisely what they're planning to do.
Smart city. And Jay, we live in Glasgow, Scotland. And they tell us that we won a competition to become the UK's first smart city.
Yep.
Imagine that, eh? Winning a competition for that. But that makes me think of Minority Report. And that's another movie that you've actually broke down as well.
Yeah, in Minority Report, you have the idea that they're going to implement predictive analysis, and that you could conceivably be accused of a crime before the crime has even been committed, right? I mean, this is the whole plot of the movie. One of these, Philip K. Dick sort of predictive things, and which also includes a lot of esoteric elements, right? I mean, they call it the temple. Once again, it's the temple is where the seers sort of look into the future and figure out who's going to be the next criminal. And what we're told now is that, it's going to be the big supercomputers are going to be able to use algorithms supposedly to predict when crimes are going to happen, and we can stop crime before it even happens. Well, that was all told to us long, long ago in the Philip K. Dick short story, right? The Minority Report. And I don't think it's accidental that Spielberg is who made this, right? And you've got everything from virtual you, a virtual you that the Pentagon has. Pentagon, same thing. The Pentagon has a virtual version of you in a giant supercomputer that they're tracking through all of the metadata and the social media input that you put up every day on social media. That is, at least even in mainstream news, been reported on as something that the Pentagon. I keep calling it the pentagram.
Maybe we should call it the pentagram.
Might as well just call it pentagram.
Yes.
Definitely.
Anyway, but yeah, that's what they've been working on, is the ability to model all reality in a simulant world system, and then try to track, trace, and predict the future through also, by the way, influencing and nudging and controlling the future through the present. I mean, that's what that movie's about. That's 2002, and here we are living it out right now.
And like I said at the start, Jay, we initially start off by thinking, all harmless entertainment, but not only propaganda, but most likely the most efficient social engineering tool that they've ever come up with, because it shapes our thoughts and our ideas. As much as we like to think it doesn't, it really does control our reality, the whole film industry.
Yeah, they've been able to, through mass media and through film, and I kind of view the mass news as just another arm of Hollywood. In my view, that's what it is. It uses all the same tactics, techniques, script writing, fictional sensationalism, right, as Hollywood does. They've been able to completely change people's views, for example, on transgenderism, right? I mean, that's now become a new civil right. And this is a very, very, very small minority of the population, people who actually identify as a transgender or some other gender or something. But they've been able to normalize this through Hollywood and through mainstream, quote, news, snooze news. And then, so that's one example just in the past few years of how they've been able to nudge and reshape morals, through this, as you called it, a powerful propaganda tool. And it's not just that. What they're going to do, and I believe that transgenderism is a way to prepare for transhumanism. They're going to start moving it in that direction, and that's what we're seeing with the science fiction now, right? So the science fiction of 10, 20 years ago was preparing us and conditioning us for the technology that we now see day to day, right? And what we're going to see 10, 20 years from now is what we're seeing in science fiction right now.
Another theme. On you go, John.
Yeah, it seems like we're going to have one of them situations. It's like we are going to be fighting against the people that have got the tech. Do you know what I mean? People with special arms, special legs. Do you know what I mean? It was segregation, another way of segregating people.
Divide and rule.
Yeah. I did a interview with Vladimir Putin's former advisor, one of his top geopolitical guys named Alexander Dugin. And Dugin made a great point in that interview about the philosophy of transhumanism, where he called it post-humanism. And what he said was that if you think about it, the reason that we are told that the transgenderism is so important is because that it's a way to be free from limitations, right? So the limitation of gender, which is, in their view, believed to be socially constructed, right? You have to get free from this. Well, the problem is that the next logical step beyond that is to say, well, humanhood or personhood is also a, quote, social construct. And so we need to be free from that too. And so who are you to judge the android or the cyborg or the X-Men or whatever, right? So that is the next stage of quote, rights. Exactly.
And another theme that keeps on reoccurring, or maybe I'm just noticing it more, but it's the zombies, Jay. Always zombies. Ever since The Walking Dead, there's never a week by without something zombie. What do you think they're trying to portray in that? Is that basically just how they view us?
It is partly that, and it's interesting too. Talking about esoterica, zombie is actually has its origins in voodoo, right? The idea of the shaman being able to use the toxin from a pufferfish or some other right, to put you into this sort of catatonic state for a few days or something, and then you come out of this trance and you believe that you're dead or something, and you're under the whim of the shaman right now. So this is more or less, I believe, what the system is doing on a large scale through drugging everybody with big pharma. Everybody's on these stupid pills, all these Prozacs and all this kind of stuff, and they're walking throughout their day in this dazed drug state, straight out of Brave New World, and it's a perfect analogy to the shaman and his zombie, and the establishment, of course, being the shaman here, and the population being the zombie. So that's why they do that, and that is throwing it in our face. So these shows also have, I think, the effect of dehumanizing and desensitizing, and sort of brutalizing the public, and seeing people as not humans, but they're just a bunch of other zombies. They're just zombies. So chopping off heads and things like that. Right? These seeing thousands of instances of this, I think, does affect us even at a subconscious level.
And it takes us kind of back to the start as well, because we started speaking about ritual. And when you've got rituals, you've got magicians, and Hollywood, it's the magician wand. They're basically casting spells and holding us in a trance, Jay. Add to that the flicker rate of the screen. It's a very, very, very well-tuned machine they've got.
Yeah, I begin the book talking about the analogy of Wizard of Oz, right? And even though the Wizard of Oz obviously is not about Hollywood, it's a great allegory or analogy for Hollywood, because the man behind the screen, these studio execs or the directors or the big companies and the money or the intelligence agencies behind all them, that's who is pulling the strings, and it's just a man behind a screen, right? And the rest of the world is under this sort of trance, right? For example, I mentioned something that Dave McGowan pointed out in Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Lookout Mountain Studios. Well, this is a famous studio that was actually run by the Air Force, right? So the top Hollywood executives would have access to this secret Air Force studio that had all the latest technology and equipment and so forth. And, they're involved in all kinds of projects, not the least of which was the filming of the atomic bomb footage. Now, you can make of that what you will. I just find it curious that it's a prominent Hollywood studio, right, Lookout Mountain, that produced this footage and produced thousands of other unknown footage that, who knows what was going on here. And I actually went a few months ago, I went to LA and I drove up Mulholland Drive and up into Laurel Canyon and got a look from the outside at this facility. And guess what? It's actually owned now by Jared Leto, the actor. So I obviously didn't go on, it's a private residence, but you can drive by on the street. And so it's pretty interesting. It's pretty creepy driving down Wonderland Avenue. And then you see this giant film studio that's converted into a house. And you have to get there. You have to drive up Mulholland Drive, by the way, which is one of the chapters in the book.
Mm-hmm. Now then, before we go, Jay, I have to bring up, and I mentioned to you in a message today, it was the quote you included in the book by Michael A. Hoffman. Now, this deals with the revelation of the method, and I was kind of taken aback when I read this, because in the alternative media, what we do, and let's look at Pizzagate, for example, is we try and expose the crimes and the rituals that these people get up to. But we ourselves may actually be participating in a ritual of our own. Could you talk to that, Jay?
Yeah, I really sort of took that quote from Hoffman as kind of a launching pad for what I was trying to do in my book. And he really keyed me into this from his famous book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, where he talked about Twilight language and the idea of coded messages and sort of mystical toponymy from James Shelby Downard, and this idea of revelation of the method, which is all tied into that, the idea that the establishment is able to condition us not just through lying to us, but also at times through telling us the truth. And so there's many levels and sneaky ways that they can do this, one of which is to use a fictional medium such as movies or books or whatever, and tell us the truth. Now, we mentioned earlier that sometimes writers might do that because they're not able to get the truth out through the normal channels, so to speak. So they might have to write a book. Well, that also doesn't mean that everything that's in a Hollywood movie is there to tell us the truth, right? It can also be there to garble the truth, to confuse it, to do disinformation or gray propaganda, or to condition us or gaslight us, right, to things that we might not initially want to accept, but just to sort of plant the idea in our mind. And then 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we're more amenable to accepting it. And I think that a lot of the science fiction propaganda does that big time. That's I think where you see most of the predictive programming is the sci-fi stuff. And so what I think Hoffman is talking about is just that principle of that you can be conditioned even through the truth getting out, especially if the population that you're spitting this truth out to is so demoralized and desensitized that they don't even have a framework by which to judge truth and falsehood.
And I'm just going to read out this quote here, if you don't mind, Jay. It says, this demonstrates, he's talking about revelation of the method. He says, this demonstrates one of our simpler methods. Realizing that our activities will sooner or later come to light, we structure our activities so that as conspiracy researchers unravel them, they will release information in such a way that it mirrors our initiatory procedure. In this way, the more we are investigated, the more masses of people are psychologically processed by the people who seek to expose us. This meme, or the meme, that constitutes our structure is then successfully mimicked within the consciousness of those investigating us. Success can then be measured precisely to the extent that our work is exposed. Now that blew me away.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You can be brutalized or traumatized through the truth, and in fact, that's what I was saying about maybe the Podesta, WikiLeaks, Pizzagate type stuff. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be revealed or shown, but rather, if a population has been already demoralized, they probably don't have the worldview or paradigm or framework from which to process this, right? So this can actually have a traumatizing effect.
Well,
and it's a form of trauma-based mind control.
Jay, to all the listeners out there, I mean, I'm not just saying this, folks. Flick through maybe a third half of this book. It is amazing. If you want more of this kind of stuff, please check it out. And Jay, where can people find the website one last time, brother?
Yes, jaysanalysis.com, and then my email's there, or you can find my Facebook links. And if you want to get a copy of the book signed, just hit me up, message me.
Oh, wow. Johnny Whistles, amazing or what?
Oh, fantastic, Kev.